Afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining the webcast. The webcast is regarding how to leverage product structures. I think everybody that's going to join has, so let's get going. So just a quick agenda. So I will do an introduction of myself, also an introduction of boundary systems, a quick overview of the topic with some additional details, demonstration, and then a question and answer session at the end. So before I carry on, I'll do a quick poll. So it sounds like everybody can hear me okay. So let's proceed. So my name is Johan Strydom. I am a senior technical specialist here at Boundary Systems. I've got over 20 years of experience in the PTC product range, and I am a certified Windchill implementer and trainer. So let's have a look about Boundary Systems itself. So it is a seen as a technology leader. We've also got partners, mostly obviously PTC, but also several others that I will cover a little bit later on some more. And we are also part of the PDS Vision group of companies that brings in a lot of additional expertise as well as other capabilities. But some of the capabilities that we have internal at Boundary Systems is things like product lifecycle management, data management. We also do CAD design consulting, simulations, as well as product development. On the right-hand side, you'll also notice a couple of our customers that we are servicing. So also a little bit more about Boundary Systems. I mentioned that we are a PTC Platinum partner with the Windchill certified implementers. We're also a preferred partner, and we are certified, well, we have certified trainers on the Creo Windchill MathCAD as well as on the Architect side of things. So like I mentioned before, our main partner is obviously PTC, but we also have others, partners like Itraj, Keyshot, ZWCAD, Moldex 3D. So there's a couple of additional partners that we also work with to expand the capabilities of the services and functionality and software offered by PTC itself. So if you require any additional information after the webcast, you can reach out to myself for any technical questions, Johan Strydom or jstrydom@boundarysys.com. If you have any sales related questions, you can email sales@boundarysys.com, or also if you visit our website or our YouTube channel where all of these webinars are recorded and will be available. So let's start off with the topic, and I've got another quick polls for you guys, please. So most of you guys are using Windchill currently. And then the last quick one, so this one is actually a 50-50 split between who is currently using the Windchill part structure or not. So I hope this is useful for you guys. So let's have a look. So let's start off with what is a product structure. And before I go into too much detail on what it is, my next question is, how is that different from a CAD structure? Because that's what most people use and look at. So to me, the biggest differences are that it contains all the related information that is required to describe the product, not only the CAD data. So examples of those can be documents, specifications, software, as well as some of the additional items that we're going to discuss today. So what are those additional functionality that you get from a product structure just compared to a CAD structure? There are things like replacements, supplier and manufacturer items. There's also different views like design, manufacturing, and service. Any related documentation, as I mentioned it before, as well as many, many more things that can be used to describe the product. So that's the main differences between a CAD structure and a product structure. CAD only representing the CAD files itself and its related drawings, whereas a product structure describes everything that is required to describe the product and to be able to manufacture and service the product. So let's look at some of those items. So the first one is replacements. So Windchill has got the capability regarding replacements using alternate and substitute. So just a little bit of additional information. So alternate, meaning you can use a different part in the place of a current part, but only, or well, everywhere where this part is used. A substitute is it can only replace the part in this specific structure. And for both of those, for alternates, there's also the option of, is this a two-way? So you might think of a specific component that you use in your structure that is a bought out component, and you can use either or. So then that can be alternate if it can be used either or in any of the structures, or a substitute if it's only in this specific structure. And like I mentioned, then you've also got the ability to say, is this a bidirectional switch over that you can do between them or not? One of the next things is supplier and manufacturer parts. So Windchill has got the functionality of what they call AML and AVL in the interface. So approved manufacturer list and approved vendor list. So in a lot of the cases, the components that you use inside of your product itself is supplied by somebody else. So it's a bought out component. So those items can also be managed inside of Windchill, and in some cases you can buy that single component from multiple locations. or multiple suppliers. So what you can do is you can manage all of those suppliers and their supplier parts with their specific part numbers, as well as the manufacturers of those. So you can say, for instance, in my example here, I've got a Dunlop tire that is approved, but a Goodyear tire that's fulfilling the same job, but from a manufacturer perspective, it's defined as do not use. So you can decide then which one is the preferred, approved, and do not use items, as well as suppliers. It's also very quick to then get a list of all the items that is supplied by a specific manufacturer or by a specific reseller. The next item I'd like to discuss is different views. So the default inside of Windchill is the design view. So when you create a new Windchill part, it is automatically a design part, but you've got additional views available like manufacturing when NPM link is also utilized, and things like service when the service part and information is utilized. So in my example that I'm showing there is I'm looking at on the left hand side the design view and on the right hand side the manufacturing view. So I'm not going to the full NPM link demonstration or full circuit part information demonstration. It's more around just the different structures and how they can be managed and controlled and reported on inside of Windchill. Then the last one I've mentioned over here is regarding related documentation. So in this case, you can see I've actually expanded my structure that I'll show to you guys just now. I can see my Bobcat main or loader assembly is my top level assembly in this case, but underneath that I've got a specification, I've got some CAD data, I've got a Windchill part for paint, but I've also got an alternate part for that. And in my ARM main, I've also got a CAD part as well as then additional documentation. So I think that is then time for the demonstration. So I'm going to show you guys a variety of things inside of Windchill that's available. So let me jump in. So I'm plain simply looking at the folder list. So these Windchill parts, most of them were automatically created from within Creo. So in my case, when I did a check-in from Creo, there's a little tick box that says auto associate and create. What it will do is it will create a Windchill part for each CAD file, and it will create a link between them. And that's how most people will start the process. So in that example, it is called a CAD-centric approach. The other way of doing it is a part-centric approach, where you can start with your Windchill parts, you can create your structure without having any CAD related to it, and at a later stage decide what you want to link or associate to each one. Okay, so I used the CAD-centric approach, and there you can see just all my Windchill parts. So let's just jump in and look at some of the details. Before I go into the part itself, one additional thing I want to show you is if I go here to the side and I expand my my product view or my recently accessed view, you can see over here I've got my Bobcat product with some of the additional links. So if I go to the details page, you will see over here it will list automatically all the end items that are part of or that is contained inside of this product. So in my case, I have a design part and I also have a manufacturing part. If I select on one of them. So in my case, I'm using the design part. If I right click on it, I've got the option there to set as primary end item. So before I do that, if I just expand this browser again, so you'll see I don't have any structure in there or structure link. If I right click and say set as primary, you will see this interface will reload, and all of a sudden I've got a structure. So what that enables you to do is to very quickly navigate to the main end item that most people will use when they go into this specific product. So if I select on it, select on structure, it will take me directly to the main end items structure tab. Okay, so that's very useful for quick access to get access to the information. If you want to change that, you just go back to the details, right click on one of them and make something different the primary, or make nothing the primary and everything will look like it did before. Okay, so this is my default view that I arrive at. So I just want to first off start with some of the views that's available. So this is the default. So you can see you don't see a lot of information. It's basically name, number, version, and view that's displayed. But all of those can be configured using this views. So the default is default and default with usage. Okay, so if I go to default with usage, you can see over there, I then get quantity and unit of measure and reference designator as the main ones that's added to this display. So it gives me some additional information available. But in a lot of cases, there are additional attributes. So you might have something like material or mass or any additional attributes that you might define as part of your CAD files or your clear files, and those can also then be populated into your structure files. So if I look at one other example where I then add some additional information or additional columns. So you can see in this case, I've added the name column, and I've also split off where identity shows you the combination of name, number, version, and view. You can also have them separate. So this is quite useful once you get to some of the reporting functionality or exporting functionality that I'll show to you just now. But that's why you can configure these views. Also, once you go into these views, so if you say manage these views, if you're an administrator, you've also got the ability to save those. So you can start off with one of the standard views. You can make a copy of them, so save as. And if you are an administrator, you've got the ability to share those with the other users. So if you guys are creating a view often, or people are creating views often for different use cases, it's very quickly to go and select additional information that you might want to display. You can specify which columns, what should be the sorting, and very quickly I've created an additional view. Then some of the additional functionality is also available is from a reporting side. So if I look at reports, so this will depend on what functionality is available on your server and which licenses has been purchased. But with normal Windchill PDM link, things like the single and multi-level information should be available, as well as the last one, the change baseline. So that is not there by default. However, it can be enabled with a preference. So the administrator can go into the administrative area and define that preference to be available for all the users. So while we're on that topic, let me quickly show you what the change baseline report looks like. So it is very similar to the structured view we can see now. However, it shows some additional information. So you will see here that it will also list the CAD files and other related information. So in my case, I've got a CAD part, a document. I've also got some specifications. And I also have some additional columns displayed. So you can see there's things like authorization. What that will display to you is who authorized this item to be in the current state that it is in. So that might be a user that did something like a set state or a promote, as well as then the date and time when that happened. But if you're using things like the built-in change process with problem report, change request, and change notice, like I've done over here, I can see that this was authorized by a change notice and the date and time. If this, or if one of the items is currently being changed, it will also show that information. So it will show there that the item is currently being changed and when the new item, so the need by planned authorization, all of those type of things will be then available based on the change process actions. Once again, these reports can all be customized, similar to the view that I showed you earlier on. So you can add additional columns if that is required. But there is also, with all of these, under actions, the ability to export them into multiple formats. So things like normal text file, a PDF, a CSV, or Excel or XML. Okay, so those are all available from the reports, as well as from the normal structure view. Those exports are also available, and I'll show you some of them a little bit later on as we carry on through the process. So something else, let's have a look at one of the other reports. So there's also a multi-level BOM with replacements. So I mentioned replacements earlier on, being alternates and substitutes. So if I run that report, in my case, I just have one. So for my paint, I also have an optional part for the paint, and it is an alternate, and it will display the additional information for that. So I can directly from here see that there is an alternate part for paint that I can use as well in this specific structure. I see there is one question that came in. I will leave that one until the end, and I will try and get to it then. So that is the multi-level BOM with replacements. Let's have a look at one of the other reports. And then there's the report for multi-level BOM with vendor and manufacturer list. Okay, let's have a look at that quickly. And in my example over here, I've got my tire that I use 4 of, and I can get them from 2 manufacturers. In my case, the manufacturers are Goodyear and Dunlop, with the manufacturer's part number. So when I phone them up and I want to say I want to order something, I've got all of their details on hand. But what I can also see from here is which one is approved or do not used or preferred. So you can define as many of those items as what is required, and you can also define which of those are approved, do not used, or preferred. And that is the same also for vendor. So manufacturer, as I mentioned, is the person who actually makes the specific item, whereas a vendor is the person who sells you the item. So you might go to a general store where you can buy nuts and bolts or fasteners, and you can have, for each one of those general stores or hardware stores, you might have a different vendor part number for each of those. However, it might all be manufactured by one actual company. So you can have all of that information available in one view and one list. And I will show you a little bit of additional details for each of those as we proceed. The next one I want to quickly show is the different views. So as you can see from the top, we are looking at the design view in this case. So there's functionality where I can compare my CAD to my part, but there's also where I can actually manipulate those different views, and that is the NPM link functionality. So what I've got here is the ability to compare and manipulate the two different views. So on the left hand side, I've got my design view, and on the right hand side, I've got the manufacturing view. So you will notice over here, the BOM has been broken down from a very flat structure to a indented structure. So now there's a wheel assembly that contains the wheel nuts, the rim, and the tire. There's also the main cab assembly that contains all the other information, or all the other components. You will also notice from here that on the left hand side, all of them has got a little green tick mark showing that there is a equivalent. So the part has been consumed from the design to the manufacturing. That is on the latest version. If I look at the right hand side, I can see there that things like the cab, the main cab and the wheel assembly does not, as those are new items that was created specifically for the manufacturing side of things. A very similar interface is also available for service. So if you need to define a service structure, so which items in your structure is serviceable and which items are sellable for those serviceable items, you've also got the ability then to define which is the upstream view. So in my case, my manufacturing is downstream and my design is upstream. So similar thing to the service view, you can define which one is my upstream. So is it design or is it manufacturing? And that might depend on which process you follow to break down your structure for a service department. So let's look at then some of the other functionality in a little bit more detail. So I mentioned this paint has got some a alternate or a replacement part available. So if I go to related, and if I go there to alternates, I can see there for this paint, I've also got a alternate part. The name of it, the type of it, and also if it is a two-way alternate or not. So similar to what I showed you in the slides. If we then go back to that structure and we have a look at the tire, some additional information about that, and you'll notice that for each of those Windchill parts, I will have a AML AVL tab. So approved vendor and manufacturer. So you can see over here, this is where I can define, I can create a new manufactured part or the part, and I can link it directly in here. There's also the functionality available where you can go and see which are all the parts that come from a specific manufacturer in the complete system or from a specific vendor. One of the other things that's available, so you will notice at the top there's a sourcing context. So there you can also then define, so if you've got manufacturing facilities in different areas in the country or in the world, and you might have different vendors all over the world. So you can define that you've got a sourcing context for United States, and you might have a different one for different states in the United States, but you also might have different ones for things like Mexico or Europe or specific areas in Europe. And then you can see which, so if I'm looking at this structure, but it's specifically for the United States, these are the vendors where I can buy this part from. Or if I'm looking Mexico, it might be a whole different list of items, different list of vendors where I can purchase this specific item from. So I showed you some of the reports that's available, but now let's have a look at actually seeing them all in one view. So if I go to my display over there, so there's a couple of things I can do. There's things like show occurrences. So what that means is it will show each item as a single item. So you'll notice that my boot, for instance, and my front arm, the quantity is 2. If I say show occurrences, I will actually see them twice without a quantity. But for now, as I said, this is quite a simple structure, so I don't need to expand anything. The only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say select all the items, and then if I select on show, there are several additional things now I can show. So the related documents, the CAD files, the replacements, distribution targets that is used for your communication to your ERP system, as well as the manufacturer and vendor. So I'm just going to say show all of those, and you'll see the structure will very quickly expand much bigger. Okay, so I can see there I've got my, and this is the main difference between a CAD structure and a part structure. Now I can actually see for this main loader, I've got a specification, I've got a Creo assembly, I've also got 2 Creo drawings. I have a distribution target that is used to communicate to an ERP system. I've got my paint, I've got an alternate paint, I've got the arm, once again with a CAD file, as well as a additional document related to it. And so I can go down my complete structure, and if I look at my tire, I can see I've got a CAD part, I've got a CAD drawing, but I've also got 2 vendor parts over here for my 2 different people, well, vendors that I can purchase this from. Now, What additional thing I can do is, I mentioned before, things like reports, but there's also things like I can export this directly into Excel as a report, and it will have all the information available. So if you have a look, I've got 2 of those Excel documents open here. The one is the default review without having anything expanded. Whereas the second Excel document, let me just move it across so that you can see both of them. The second Excel one is a report with all the information listed in there. So the Windchill parts, all the items below that, the CAD parts, the drawings, the documents, all of those are there in my structure report. So that's the reason why these views are also quite important. So whatever you see on the screen here is what will go into Excel. So if there's, for instance, things like the distribution that I don't want to see, I can very quickly go in here and say I want documents and the CAD files and maybe just the supplier parts, and you can see they are then listed. Or if I don't want things like my CAD files, I only want the manufacturer and vendor and the replacement parts, I can very quickly get that view, and once again I can export that into Excel. And there we go. So it's really quite quick to get this information into different formats as well. Okay, and as I mentioned, I've got a indented bill of material. I've got my alternate one because that's what I've selected, and for my tire I've also got the additional manufacturer parts available. So I mentioned the alternate parts earlier on, so some of the functionality that's available for that as well is if we have a look at one of these. So if I right click on any of the components and I go to replacement, I can select in there, I want to replace it with a new item or the existing item. So that's basically the process that I followed earlier on to set this up the first time. I said replace it with a new item. I created a new item and then selected it. And it displayed like I showed you earlier on. If I select on one that doesn't have a replacement defined, you will see I only have new and existing available. Whereas if I select on one that has a replacement defined, one of the very useful things in here is I can directly from here swap them around. So I can swap which one is the alternate / substitute parts. So that those will then, this alternate will become the main one, the substitute, well, the alternate will become the main item, and the current paint will become the alternate to it. But like I mentioned, if you want to create that new, you just go to replacements and you can say you want to create new or use an existing item. If you obviously select existing, search the Windchill database, and all the items that are available will be there. And then you can also define there, is that a alternate or a substitute, and is that a one-way or just or both way alternate. Okay. I think I have for now covered most of the things that I wanted to. No, I think the last thing I want to quickly cover is things like filters. So similar to what you've got different views, design, manufacturing, service, you've also got different filters that you can define. So I can define, for instance, how do I look at this? So the latest view being design, working being whichever lifecycle state. I can also change that to, for instance, I want to see the latest design released. Okay. And you will see there, some of these items will show up with a little black dot. That means there's no released version of that specific item yet. Whereas for these ones I do have, and this sidearm I also do. If I quickly change that filter again, and I say if there's something that is unresolved, apply the latest. So it will look at the latest released. If there's not a released, it will just look at latest. So I might have a version A that's released and a version B that's not yet. I will only see version A. But if I only have a version A and it's not released, it will only show me version A in this case. I can obviously go in here and quickly go and create a new view. And one of the columns I want to quickly add is the state. And I think it will make a bit more sense when I display that. Okay, so that's the one I mentioned earlier on. So if I say, don't show me released, that's why it displays the little black circles, because there is no released version of this or these specific items. So it won't display even the state of the version or anything related to it. Whereas if I do that, I will see the information. Cool. So I think that is it for the demonstration. So let me quickly get you some of the questions. So Jeffrey asked, what is the advantages or disadvantages of using, a part-centric approach to a product or CAD-centric approach? So usually the difference there is depending on where you start your design process. If you start your design process from a CAD perspective, where you physically start creating parts in CAD, you check them in and that builds up your structure, you would then usually use the CAD-centric approach. However, if you start off with a structure type view, we first define how is this product structure going to look like, and then at a later stage I start doing my design and I just link them up. You would use a part-centric approach. So that's the main differences between when you will use which one. Is there any other questions that you guys have? If there is not, just a reminder, if you have any technical questions, please contact myself, Johan Strydom, or Joe Strydom at boundarysys.com for any sales questions, sales@boundarysys, or visit our website or our YouTube channel, where all of these webinars are available within a day or two after the webinar. So if there's no additional questions, I think I will end the webinar. Thank you, everybody, and thank you very much for joining.